All right.
Professor Sugata Mitra, welcome to the podcast. I am so thrilled to get to talk to you. Where are you phoning in from?
Well, I am at the moment in Gateshead in England, where I did quite a bit of my work earlier. I'm retired now, and I live here.
Amazing. Quite possibly the most important question, excuse me, for our conversation. What's your coffee order when I can finally nip over and buy you a coffee?
Well, my coffee order is an Americano with milk and no sugar.
Fantastic. And is there a book that you've read recently? It could be within your sphere of influence, or it could be more broadly, that has caused you to stop and reconsider a few things in your life.
Well, as it happens, I did actually. There's a book out called The Golden Age. It's by William Dalrymple. William Dalrymple is a reasonably well-known author. He writes about India and he lives in India. But The Golden Age is a book about the Silk Route
Oh,
from China into the West and how that was actually preceded by a sea route out of India. And
wow.
Dalrymple's theory is that a lot of stuff traveled to the West, not via land, but by sea. And it went both ways. It went all the way into Europe, Mesopotamia and Europe, out of India, and all the way east to, I believe, even Australia back then in the early BC, around 40 BC or
Fascinating.
something like that. And it's very well supported with lots and lots of evidence uh, and plenty of Indian history that I didn't know anything about. And that book it might just end up being one of those rare books that I will read twice.
Fantastic. I love that. What are you most grateful for, Sugata, from your parents?
Well, people have asked me that before, and it's really hard to put one single thing down. What immediately comes to my mind is basically from both my parents was live in the present, just that, live in the present, which,
Beautiful.
I interpreted in whatever way I could since the age of whatever, 5 or something when they told me about this. And even today, I continue to debate that in my mind. So I think it must have been one of those great influences, just that one line, live in the present.
I love that. And I think that is timeless advice and especially important now because we're so busy and we're doing so many other things. And I think that's wonderful advice. Sugata, what were you like at school and what first sparked your interest in education?
It's kind of two questions. What was I like in school and what sparked my interest in education? The first line that comes to mind is definitely not my school. That didn't spark my interest in education. However, having said that, what was I like in school? You know what? I knew how to play the system. I
Right.
was very good at it. So I was a good boy. My school was a Jesuit school in Delhi, a well-known Jesuit school, St. Xavier's, and an excellent school. I mean, it's made me what I am. However, I knew how to handle that system
Mm.
of sitting in class, of being good, of doing well in examinations, of being disciplined and polite, and, that kind of thing. As a result, I went through school and I came out of school one of their best students. Did I actually believe that I should be that way? Well, I believed I should be that way in order to survive. I don't think I believed that I should be that way because people ought to be that way, if that makes sense. So, uh, so,
Yeah.
so there were these two things inside my mind. But that's what I was like in school, a good boy.
It's so interesting, and I have so many follow-up questions about that. Do you think that you would pursue a career in education? Did it seem like the natural progression of being a quote unquote good boy and good student?
Not at all. In fact, I have proof of that. Well, I mean, there is proof of that, which is probably lost. But when I was in my ninth year of school, one of the Jesuit fathers did an experiment with all of us. He sat us down and he said, take a piece of paper and write down in it what you would like to become. We all wrote that together with myself and two of my best friends still recall the fact that everything we wrote there actually came true. In my
Interesting.
piece of paper, I had written, I would like to be a scientist. I didn't specify what kind of scientist, but I would like to be a scientist. But if it turns out that I cannot, or I become a third-rate scientist, then I would like to become a writer.
Wow.
And that's about everything I've done for the rest of my life. I've fooled around with science, but not terribly badly, according to people. And I've written, and people say most of the time that my writing is readable and good.
Yeah.
Where will it end up? Will I end up the scientist who wrote or the writer who did science? I
Yeah.
don't know, but it's there inside that piece of paper written, I don't know,
Uh,
about 60 something years ago.
Sugata, how did your experience as a physicist help you to ask really good questions? Because I would imagine that the physicists that I know, and I don't know a lot of them, but the physicists that I know have this incredible ability to ask really great questions and are really inquisitive. Can you relate to that in terms of how that supported you in your own question asking, if that makes sense?
Yeah, well, that did not actually happen so much in school as I guess it did in my adolescent years and inside the university. This whole idea of physics as a subject being an attempt to answer questions. And then when I thought about it, I said, that's not restricted to physics. That's restricted, I mean, that this is true of all of science. You ask questions, and that's what drives science. And then I thought some more about it. And I said, well, it's not restricted to science, it's restricted by nothing. Everything in life, ever since we became Homo sapiens, we've spent our entire duration on this planet asking questions and trying to answer them. And that's how we've gotten to where we are.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get ourselves into a mess asking the wrong questions, but most of the time not. Another part of that answer, where did I learn how to ask the questions? It wasn't from a physicist. It was from one of my greatest heroes. It was from Socrates.
Yeah.
When I was about 14 or 15, I read Plato's Republic.
Love that.
I was completely enamored by Socrates.
Oh,
And I remember for a while, I used to use these Socratic questions and drive people mad. Like, for example, I would enter into class a little bit late, and the teacher, usually Jesuit priest, would say, Sugata, you are late. And I would say, yes, father, is it bad to be late? And he would say, fuck, of course it is. And I'd say, is there a logical reason why it's bad to be late? Could it sometimes be good to be late? And the father would say, he was actually very fond of me. He would say, now you stop thinking and sit down. That's how I learned how to ask the questions, which,
love that.
yeah, which people somehow either find funny, or that's another way of saying they don't want to ask those questions.
I love that. Your passion and your inquisitiveness is infectious. I can feel it all the way over here in beautiful Sydney. How do you keep that going? Because I can imagine, I mean, you have worked for so many years in education. You're currently retired. I think about my granddad when he retired and he just kind of slowed down a bit. It feels like you're kind of ramping up. How do you maintain that excitement and that passion and that zeal? Because you seem like one of the youngest retirees that I know. It's wonderful. How do you maintain that passion and that excitement? The world's a fascinating place, isn't it?
Well, I don't think I ever thought of myself that way, actually. It's just that I do things, and I ask myself what I could do next. And I've never run into a situation where I've had to say to myself, I don't know what to do next. In fact, the opposite. It was always a question of, out of all those incredible and infinite number of things that I could do right now, which one shall I take?
I love that. I love
So,
that.
so when I retired, I
Yeah,
suddenly found that the width of the choices of how many things I could do had actually increased rather than decreased. And so I spent a few weeks, I still do, I guess, sitting and saying, well, where do I go?
I love that.
So,
It
so it
keeps you
just
young.
keeps me going. It keeps me going. I feel that there's not enough time and there's too many
Yeah.
things to do.
I think that's so wonderful. It's really lovely to hear. Sugata, we couldn't possibly talk about the scope of your career in our short conversation today, but I did want to talk about something which most of the people that are listening to this will be familiar with. And that's your famous hole in the wall experiment. You did an incredible TED talk many years ago, and I'll make sure I put that in the show notes. But for those that are not familiar with the hole in the wall experiment, would you mind maybe unpacking that for us, please?
Yeah, sure. I've done this so many times. I could do it with I could do it in my sleep. But I see your point. It's a very important point. The hole in the wall was an experiment done more than 25 years ago. And I realize now when in my public talks that there are people who weren't even born then.
It's
I
crazy.
how can I be so arrogant as to imagine that everybody would know what I'm talking about? So I guess you do need a recap. Back takes us back to the 90s, a time when personal computers were just about beginning to appear in homes all over the world. I was in Delhi, India, and personal computers, PCs, were expensive. A PC was about, I don't know, about 6 months' salary for an Indian. And so when you bought one, which some of my richer friends did, they would go and tell each other, my PC's arrived and unpacked it. And I noticed something interesting. Many of them with young children would say, and I told my 5-year-old who was looking as I unpacked the PC, I told him, don't even think about it. and, and I said, oh, poor things. Anyway, well, that was like when you buy a new car or something like that. And if you have a 5-year-old, you say, yeah, don't touch this, don't do that, don't do that, and so on. What happened next was a little strange. Those friends of mine who bought personal computers for home use, after about a few weeks would say, you know what? I think my daughter or I think my son is gifted. I said, oh, well, I mean,
Yeah.
good for you, but why did you come to this conclusion? I said, oh, the other day I was on my PC, I was looking for a file. And the list of files would just flash by. Remember, these were the days of
I
DOS, disk
remember.
operating. The files were just flashing by. So how would I stop it to read if the file I'm looking for is there or not? And I was kind of doing this when I heard this little voice from the side say, you have to type dir/u/p and it will stop at every page. I turned around and it was my little girl. And I said, how did you know that? And she said, well, you did that yesterday. You've forgotten.
Wow.
So I think she's gifted. Now, I heard this not from one friend, but I heard this sort of story from several of my friends, including myself. My son, when I got my first PC, I think it was 1988, was 7 years old. And the same thing. He would prompt me from the back and say, why didn't you click that? Why didn't you do this? So I said, well, all the rich people's children can't have become gifted suddenly. So it must be something to do with computers and
Mm.
children. And all of us, luckily, did the same thing.
Yeah,
All of
wow.
us got up from our chairs and said, okay, you can have a go.
Wow.
And the same magic started to happen. 2 days
Wow.
later, there's music from the PC. Remember 1989?
Yeah,
I would say,
it was hard.
hey, can that thing play music? And
Yeah.
my son, the 7-year-old, would say, yeah, that's how it's called. I don't know. There was some file format in those days. It's called this, and you have to use a player, and you have to do da 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 da. And then a few days later, an animation on the screen. And say, yeah, you mean it can show pictures? Yeah, of course. There's this way and there's that way. And then games and this and that. There was no internet. So
Wow.
all of us were a bit puzzled about what was going on. Around this time, there was also this term, this saying, the digital divide.
Mm.
And it was a word from the developing world, which said that of the millions and millions of children that we have, only a few have access and the others don't. So the ones who don't have access, they're at a disadvantage. It struck me as very unfair. And I said, it's just because of money? Well, I am going to give computers to poor children. And then a little voice in my head said, and where do you think you're going to get the money from? I said, I'll buy one. I can buy one. And then my friend said, one computer, who are you going to give it to? I said,
Mm.
I'll put it in the slum. There was a slum outside my office in Delhi with lots of children. I said, I'll put it in the slum. And I said, and they said, it will get broken and stolen. And I said, we'll see. I just want to try this. So there was a boundary wall between my office and the slum. I made a hole inside that and I stuck the monitor of the PC through that hole so that it was showing up on the other side of the wall. And I couldn't do the same with the keyboard, but I could do the same thing with a touchpad, which I also buried into the wall. And I turned it on and I left it there. And people said, what on earth are you trying? I mean, these children don't go to school. I had connected that computer to the internet. This was now 1999.
Wow.
It took me 9 years to get the funds together to buy that one PC to do this one experiment, which everybody thought was ridiculous. So in 1999, I did that. I connected the computer to the internet, and people said they haven't heard of the internet. They don't know English. They've never seen a computer before. What do you think you're going to achieve? And I said, if I knew what I was going to achieve, then I wouldn't have done it. So I want to see
Wow.
what happened. What happened next was, it won't be a surprise to people now. What happened next was that within a few hours, the children were browsing and they were teaching each other how to browse. And the question was, who taught them? And I said, I don't know. And they said, well, maybe a passing programmer or somebody like that, somebody who knew computers. Maybe one of them showed them. I said, yeah, that's possible. By then there was interest. I got a little bit more money from my organization and I repeated the experiment in a slum in a city in India where the chances of a passing programmer was zero. And I got the same results. I said, no one is teaching them. Then how are they learning? And at that point, I got this incredible thought. It wasn't, the question was wrong. The question, who is teaching them, was wrong. The correct question would have been, what is teaching them?
Amazing.
Whatever it is, it wasn't human.
Yeah.
That was the hole in the wall experiment. It got repeated many times. I got funded by the
Gosh.
World Bank. I repeated it all over the world, everywhere. And then we came to this conclusion. Groups of children given access to the internet in a safe and public environment. All the words are important. Groups of children given access to the internet in a safe and public environment will learn how to use it by themselves. Up to the learn is fine. The by themselves was not fine.
That is absolutely incredible.
Yeah. So that was the hole in the wall experiment.
What do you think that says about children's natural curiosity?
Well, children's natural curiosity would have been obvious because if it was not a computer, if it was just a teddy bear that had dropped into a slum, children would have still crowded around it and they would have fought over it and they would have done all sorts of things with it. It's unlikely that they would have ripped it apart and thrown it away. They would have played with it. Children are like that. So the computer was no different. It wasn't about curiosity. It was more about how they learned how to use it. At that point, what helped me was physics, because it suddenly struck me that what I was looking at was a self-organizing system. And a self-organizing system is well known in physics. It's a system that makes itself, that builds itself.
Wow.
Like a thunderstorm, or a tidal wave. If you say, who made that? No one made it. It just happened. It's collective phenomenon. It only happens when lots of things get put together. And here were a lot of children put together.
So, Sugata, I have so many questions. I mean, I'm a huge fan of self-organized learning environments, or SOL, which is obviously a significant part of what you're talking about. But what role do you think then teachers play in learning? Because that is our job just to create the environment in which learning can take place? Is our job to ask great questions? What role do you think that the teacher plays? And also, how has that changed over the years?
Well, the role that teachers have to play is, as you said, ask the questions or pose the puzzle. Because, if children can learn to use computers by themselves, somebody has to give them that computer. That has to be the teacher. Okay. And this is not unknown. We know this from 2,500 years ago, that all you need to do is ask a good question. Two people said that around 500 BC, around the same time. They didn't know each other. They were halfway around the world. One was Socrates in Greece. The other was the Buddha in India. Both said the question is more important than the answer. So that was the role of the teacher. But what happened next? As we went along into the Industrial Revolution, it all changed. The teacher became the repository of knowledge, the person who knew, and education became the act of transferring that knowledge from the teacher to the student. The whole business of self-organization of the big questions was forgotten. So it's only now in the world which is vitally different from that of the Industrial Revolution
Yes.
that we suddenly realize that this system of transferring knowledge from teacher to student is no longer as relevant as it was during the age of machines.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think, Sugata, if we were to replicate that experiment in 2025, would get similar results? Because it is a vastly different world now. But do you still think those core principles remain the same?
I do, and not simply because of belief. I took one of the experiments that I had done almost 20 years ago, about 5 years after the hole in the wall, about giving a group of children a really complex question about DNA. And these were Indian children in a village. And it's all published. It's considered one of the great publications of the time. It
I've
was
read that. Yeah.
actually in the Australasian Journal of Educational Technology, and they actually did teach themselves about DNA, and they then answered the question to me. Well, what I did 1 year ago, 2024, was that at a smaller scale, I repeated that experiment. And I got precisely the same results. And people said, you won't because now there's AI and they're just going to ask AI and they're going to, just write down whatever it said. I said, we won't know until we do it. I did it.
Yeah.
And we got exactly the same results. And you
Wow.
know what? What might interest your viewers a great deal, I have not been able to publish that second experiment because the editors say, but this is already known. You already showed this.
Wow, that is interesting.
Yeah.
Gosh, wow, that's fascinating. I mean, on that, Sugata, it's a vastly different world, isn't it now? I mean, I feel like there have been so many educational transformations since your famous 1999 experiment, but AI seems to be different. It seems to me like it's not just like Google changed the role of teachers because Google was smarter than all of us. AI seems like it's going to revolutionize everything when it comes to education. What are your thoughts on that? Do you agree? Do you disagree? How do you feel about the landscape at the moment?
You know what? I think that education, industrial age education, was in any case destroyed by the internet ever since the late 1990s. Google, or actually search engines, destroyed it. So how did the education system respond? It said, you cannot use Google to answer questions. I've never heard anything so ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
Okay. When you're in school, you cannot use Google to answer questions. When you're out of school, like the rest of us, you always use Google to answer questions. And then comes AI. And I know what was going to happen, and it did happen. The first reaction of the education system, you cannot use AI. It's forbidden.
Just like Google.
Just like Google. So, I mean, I'm not taken by surprise at all. Yes, AI is going to, make a difference. But what is AI doing? Generative AI? It's simply doing what we used to do after our Google search. After doing a good quality Google search, we would summarize the results and say, this is what I've understood. The AI is doing that for us. It's cutting out one step and showing us that understanding. So what? Is that a regressive step? Well, there are people who say, we will all stop thinking. But then, the doom and gloom crowd have always said that humanity is going to stop thinking. Ever since we started walking on our 2 feet, I guess, they said we will stop thinking because these technological innovations are, eroding our natural ability to do things.
Mm.
AI will let us not think about things, but it will enable us to those things which earlier we thought we should try. It will enable us to ask questions which no one knows the answer. And if you ask a question to which no one knows the answer, the internet doesn't know.
Yes, that's wonderful. And once again, I have so many follow-up questions to that. I think for me, it has never been a more exciting time to be a teacher and to be involved in education because I just see like limitless possibilities. I mean, I've been accused of many things in my life, and one of them is being annoyingly optimistic. And I think that's pretty good to be accused of that. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. So, guys, I'm just wondering if do we still need schools? Because it seems like we can, the role of, sorry, let me rephrase that question. I'll have to edit that one out. That was a pretty awkward question. Sugata, do you think that teachers are still essential? Because it seems like we can derive our own learning through self-organized learning environments. We have AI, we have Google, we have all of these other amazing tools at our disposal. Do you think teachers are still important? And if so, what is their role in this new educational landscape?
Teachers are the core of our society, particularly the primary school teachers. They build our societies. So there's no question in my mind about whether we need them or not. I mean, we will just descend into savagery without them. Yes, questions of the Buddha. We need them to ask the hard questions. We need them to improve the imagination of children.
Yeah.
We need them to be the children's. Children go on an intellectual adventure. Need the teacher to say, you go there, I'll come with you.
I love that. It seems like the role of teachers has never been more important. And I think for so many people, these technological innovations are quite terrifying and quite scary. But for me, I see it as an amazing opportunity to expand what we or to provide opportunities to young people that we never thought possible. It's a really, really exciting time, I think, to be a teacher. Do you think that what do you think the future classrooms will look like, Sagata? Do you think they will be vastly different to what we see at the moment? Do you see students engaging in personalized learning through AI chatbots? What are some of the things that you're seeing in future classrooms?
Well, let's say we reduce that question to what will school be like 20 years from now?
Yeah,
In
much better idea.
45, for example. Okay. I have a method for answering a question like that, for predicting the future. It goes like this. 20 years from now will be at least as different from 20 years ago. Okay. I mean, I think nobody would disagree that 20
Yeah,
years from now will be at least as different as 20 years ago was
yeah,
for education. Let's go 20 years, 2005. Unfortunately, nothing changed.
yeah.
You could send the teacher back in a time machine 20 years back to 2005. She'll just pick up her pen and start doing whatever she, okay. Some technology, but education hasn't really changed. There's an example I think Nicholas Negroponte used to give it, that if you take a doctor, send him back 100 years into an operation theater, he will recognize, if you take sorry, do that again. If you take a doctor from 100 years ago and bring him, a surgeon, into an operation theater of today, he will recognize nothing at all. Apart from the patient lying on the bed, almost everything will be alien. All those monitors, this, that, the other thing. If you take a teacher from 100 years ago and you bring them into a classroom today, they would look for the chalk. Having not found the chalk, they'll pick up the pen and they'll do exactly what they did 100 years ago. That has to change. It's not a question of who will be what. So coming back to our prediction, what will happen to schools in 20 years from now? Well, sorry to be not optimistic. They will be almost exactly the same as they are today, just as they were in 2005. Yes, there's some pedagogical changes, some curricular changes, and so on. At least as much as the difference will be at least as much as it was between 2005 and 2025, which is nothing much. Okay? Unless people like you with your podcasts can accelerate that rate of change. Will that happen? Well, it has happened. Yeah. My greatest hope is that a change, such as the change that happened in physics in the 1920s, from Newtonian classical mechanics to this absurd world of quantum mechanics. If that kind of change can happen to education, then the school of 2045 will look very different. Will schools still be there? Of course it will be there. Schools are there for children to meet their friends. That's their main objective, I think, their main purpose.
Yeah. Sugata, before I couldn't agree more, and it's just reminded me of the incredible privilege to get to be part of an education system and part of that conversation now, because I think it is the greatest job in the world. And I just can't believe that I get to do it. It's really exciting. But it is a huge responsibility, isn't it? Because things have to change. And I would be devastated if your prediction is correct, that in 20 years' time it will be no better than 20 years ago. I hope, I'm sure we both hope that you're wrong with that, but we need to have these conversations, and I think they're so, so important. Sugata, before we hit record, you mentioned a little bit about COVID and about how that really changed the landscape in terms of education. What were some of the lessons that came out of COVID in terms of how we use and how we engage in technology? You mentioned that every single person during the pandemic had their own hole in the wall during lockdown. So, would you mind unpacking that a little bit and tell me about that experience?
Sure. When COVID hit, it destroyed the old system. It just shut it down. Okay. So you couldn't go to school, teachers couldn't go to school, students couldn't go to school. So what did we do? We turned to the internet. And I believe that we survived those years of COVID because of the internet. I, in fact, wrote a book about it. It's called Virus versus the Internet. The internet stood between us and the virus and helped us to go through with that period. But we didn't know how exactly to use it. So teachers tried to pretend that they can create a classroom using the internet. So that all the students will be at home with their computers. The teacher will be at home with her computer, and then she will create this classroom using Zoom or something like that. It didn't work. It didn't work. All the scores went down. And after COVID was over, all the researchers said it has done enormous harm to education. Why? Because the examination results have dropped dramatically. The children's interest in learning has dropped dramatically. Why has it dropped? Well, because instead of going to school, they were now sitting in front of a tiny little monitor listening to these voices blabbing at them all the time. That wasn't the right way to do it. The right way would have been a self-organized learning environment where the teacher simply asks a question and says, I'll come back tomorrow. You give me the answer. But we never did that.
Yeah.
So yes, COVID did one good thing. It showed us that there can be an alternative to school, but it did not tell us how to build a better alternative.
Yeah. It's interesting. It was such a strange period in my life, COVID. Like I was having a conversation with my wife the other day, and on my phone in the memories, it popped up a photo of us wearing masks, our whole family. And I remember thinking, that was such a strange time. And during that time, I was teaching kindergarten on Zoom how to read, and it did not go well. It was really, really difficult. But I think it was obviously globally hugely traumatic time, and so many people lost their lives. But it was fascinating to see how a crisis such as that forced us to rethink a lot of the things which we thought were normal, and especially in education. And I was amazed at the work that teachers were able to do during that time. It was a really difficult time in Australia. I know Melbourne, which is a city close, obviously in Australia, for those that are listening that are not from Australia, that had some of the longest lockdowns in the world. And to see some of the amazing work that teachers did during that time was incredible. But it reminded me that it reminded me of the importance of the role of teachers as facilitators of knowledge and of learning. It was a very strange time to live through. I don't know what the experience was like for you. Whereabouts in the world were you when that was all happening?
I was in lockdown in Calcutta, India, and I used to go out for walks in the evenings whenever possible. And I would pass house after house. And out of many houses, I would hear this voice coming from a PC, obviously, saying, now turn to page 59 of the 4. And I thought
Wow,
to myself, oh my God, this is
those
not the
poor
right way.
teachers.
Yeah, poor teachers.
That's
So this is how I spent the COVID years.
amazing. So, guys, I want to be respectful of your time because I know there are so many other things that you could be doing other than having a conversation with me. So, I am so, so grateful that you talk to me. What moments in your career have made you the most proud?
From the length of time that I'm spending thinking about this question, it should be clear that no such moments sort of pop into my mind immediately. It made me proud of myself. Well, nothing really has ever made me particularly proud of myself, but certain things have made me amazed. So
Hmm.
I can remember one amazing moment in my life, which was standing on the main TED stage in Los Angeles, Long Beach, looking occasionally at the audience as I spoke. And I looked to my left and I saw Sergey Brin. I looked to my right, and I saw Cameron Diaz. Somewhere at the back was a familiar looking face. It was Bill Gates. And at that moment, I felt a little bit amazed. And I said, is this really I? Is this me? Or is this a fantasy?
It was an out-of-body experience, it seems. Sugata, one final question. If you could get one message out to teachers around the world, what would it be?
I know that one. Prepare your learners for their future, not your past. Now, you should think about that. Prepare your learners for their futures, not your past.
I love that. The more I think about that, the more outstanding that thought becomes. I think there's going to be so many teachers that will really change the way that they teach. Sugata, I can't thank you enough for your time. Honestly, it is an absolute joy to get to speak to you. It's a career highlight for me, honestly. Your work has been truly transformative, and there are so many people that are better educators and better school leaders because of the work that you have done. So I'm incredibly grateful for your work and your career, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you for calling me for this. I hope a lot of people will listen. And out of the lot of people that listen, if even one is changed by one little bit, I would have done my job.
Thank you.
Thanks.